This episode is brought to you by Progressive, home of the Name Your Price tool. You say how much you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll show you coverage options that fit your budget. It's easy to start a quote. Visit Progressive.com to get started. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, November 28th, 1843, Hawaii Independence Day. And listeners, yes, I know many of you will not be listening to this on November 28th. We kind of had to scramble the timing of this episode a little bit because of the Thanksgiving break, but we really want to get to it, so cast your mind back to November 28th. And it is Hawaiian Independence Day. And I will say that a big part of this story and why we are interested in this story is because that phrase, Hawaiian Independence Day, it's a very loaded phrase. Independence from whom? What type of independence exactly? So in many ways, this is our moment of starting to look at a centuries-long conversation and fight around those very questions about what exactly independence means in Hawaii. But nevertheless, this day, November 28th, is the date of the signing of the Anglo-Franco Proclamation of 1843, the official diplomatic recognition of the independence and sovereignty of the Hawaiian Kingdom by Great Britain and France. And for about 50 years, Hawaii was ruled by Hawaiians, albeit a Hawaiian monarchy, which was then overthrown in the late 1890s, which was a move supported by the United States, which then annexed Hawaii and made this a very fascinating and complicated history. We've gotten a number of requests from people to do more Hawaiian history, so we are going to do that. And this is the first moment kind of dipping into this question of independence, at least. Let's talk about it. Here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Aloha, Jody.
Hey there.
I will say, our Hawaiian listeners, shout out to you, because this has been on our list for a long time. We've been waiting for this date, but it's shown up in a couple emails we've gotten. So I went and looked to just see sort of what emails we've gotten. And we've gotten like 3 or 4 emails that mention this, but every one of those is from a listener in Hawaii. And then every one of them includes like 9 or 12 different possible Hawaiian history stories that we should cover. You know, sometimes most of the time we just get like, here's an interesting story. But something about the folks in Hawaii, very comprehensive, hitting us with tons of ideas, and we're committed to doing some more of these, and it's a great resource. So thank you if you're from Hawaii and you've gotten in touch with us. And this is, again, really fascinating. And yeah, just a little slice in this question of
it's a lot to cover. Hawaii's got a lot to cover for a tiny island.
Really fascinating history. But let's talk about exactly that moment, Anglo-Franco Proclamation. So I think there's some clues in there. But what exactly is the state of Hawaii just before this day?
Well, the state of Hawaii was that it was not a state, but it was in fact a kingdom that was considered itself independent and was about to be disabused of that notion. So as you can imagine, with any sort of Pacific island, missionaries have been sent there, and missionaries had been sent from New England who were Protestants and convinced the king to make Catholicism illegal, so that this would be, to the extent that it was a Christian state, it would be a Protestant state. And when this happens, the French are like, hey, we're Catholic. That's not cool. And so they begin to meddle in Hawaiian affairs and something that was known as the Laplace Affair. And in response to this, the Hawaiians are like, maybe people don't treat us as independently as we would like to be treated. So King Kamehameha III, who was the monarch at the time, sends out a delegation to the United States and to Europe to say, we need you to recognize our independence to prevent things like this from happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I did not realize just how far back the process of colonization was happening in Hawaii, and just how many missionaries in different countries were getting there. And maybe it's because I don't think about it because I'm not thinking about, like, I don't know, maritime or ship travel in that way, and people going all that far out to Hawaii. Right. But they are, and they're sending missionaries, and there's this really, these complicated altercations that are happening both religiously and politically and economically. And so being able to sort of declare autonomy is so important, and not just to have one country recognize it, but multiple countries come to agreement on this. And so Hawaii's national independence gets recognized by about 16 different world nations between about 1843 to 1885. But that recognition is crucial in trying to maintain its sovereignty.
And there was a real need for that recognition of independence, which became clear after they send this diplomatic party out. Because when the diplomats are away, in comes Britain, a naval captain named Lord George Paulet, who, kind of flying solo, kind of doing his own thing, decides to occupy the Kingdom of Hawaii and take power. And occupies Hawaii for 5 months. And this just drives home the need for this kind of recognition from other countries, because if Britain had already been recognizing Hawaii as an independent kingdom, then Lord Paulet would not have felt that he had the space to just take over the island.
And he does that without any authorization. There is no prior clearance that says, sure, go ahead and do this. He's like, you know what? I'm just going to take this over.
A little freelance occupation.
Yeah.
Which I mean is often the story of colonization, is that people who feel like they can freelance because no one's really watching, or because they don't have any respect for the sort of existing people. But, we've just mentioned a couple, like 2 or 3 other stories that are incredible rabbit holes that we will go down I would like to at some point. But yeah, this Laplace affair, and then Lord Paulet's 5-month kind of insurrection of sorts. I mean, the other thing that's interesting to this story, Niki, you kind of mentioned it, but it's like people from other parts of the world, and this is the story of colonization, I guess, but like people from other parts of the world coming there and then having their very interscene squabbles. Like, it's like Calvinists fighting with Protestants, fighting with Catholics. And it's like the people of Hawaii.
Nobody asked for any of you.
Couldn't you have had this back home in Boston? Like, why are we now the sort of ground on which this fight is being played out?
Yes. Please don't come here. Like, it's crazy. I have a student who's doing a paper right now, and she is looking at a woman named Bessie Stockett, who was enslaved at Princeton University and gets her freedom and then becomes a missionary. And the first place she goes to is Hawaii. And I'm like, what? What is a Black woman doing in Hawaii in like 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s? It's wild. But these were very real issues, I think, for people religiously. They really believed that they needed to have that stronghold first. More almost at the same level that they thought of, politically and economically. So these religious squabbles are not small ones.
Right. Yeah. So how is it that then we get to November of 1843, which is the moment we're marking here, where the British and French governments formally recognize the independence of the Kingdom of Hawaii? Do we have a sense of what the tipping point is? Is it this George Paulet going rogue earlier that year and sort of pointing out that like we need to shape this up a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that was the necessary condition, like they might have already been considering it, but it does bring an end to the occupation. So I think that the occupation played a big role in recognizing the independence and the sovereignty of Hawaii. And for the Hawaiian people, they see the two things as related, right? So July 31st, which is when they're finally restored, which is just a few months before the official recognition, they consider Sovereignty Restoration Day. So this was a kind of, next step to securing that independence. And it also tamps down then on inter-colonial fights between France and England. So you've got to imagine that there's also a little bit of trying to cool tensions between other empires involved there.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that like this is one of these things where everyone's like, all right, everyone back away from the ball. Like there was a desire to just, if we can sort of like make it so that no one has it, then maybe we can sort of ease political tensions in these neighboring countries that are much closer together than they were to Hawaii.
Yeah. And so then, as you said, Kellie, there's a big part of this process is independence is recognized diplomatically by a bunch of nations in the next decade or so.
Yeah.
You have most of the major countries in the world establishing diplomatic relations, and recognizing the independence. But, Hawaii is now independent, but it's controlled by a monarchy. And as I said, there's this 50-year period here when then the monarchy is overthrown, but in a really interesting way where it's both a liberation movement, but also what paves the way for annexation by the United States. So that's a really fascinating story that we will get to. But any thoughts as we kind of start to wrap up about that 50-year period? I mean, this day, I think, that we're marking here, Hawaiian Independence Day, well, there's an interesting sort of conversation about it now, but I would say in that 50-year period is when it's most kind of marked as a real holiday.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting the world together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
Yeah, I would love to do some stories from that because I think that the stories that tend to be commemorated about Hawaii are about the ones where it's intersecting with these European or U.S. imperial powers, but they're not really stories that originate in Hawaii itself. So it'd be really cool to tell some of the stories from those years of monarchy.
Yeah. So one interesting thing is that you have this late November holiday known as Hawaiian Independence Day. And we should also say that this is the day when this happens that Kamehameha the third utters that phrase. I'm not going to try and say it in Hawaiian, but it's the phrase that's still on the flag, which translates to the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. So this is the day on which Hawaii's motto, which still exists today, is coined, and the Hawaiian monarchy ascends. But you have this late November holiday, November 28th, as Hawaii and the U.S. start to intersect and talk to each other a little bit more. This interesting question comes up of the other late November holiday that the United States likes to celebrate, Thanksgiving. And so there was this interesting moment where Hawaii is already saying kind of like, hey, we have a late November holiday we're already celebrating. So what do we do with this? So they designate December 31st as Thanksgiving Day in Hawaii to kind of not step on the toes there. But that's an interesting wrinkle in this story.
Yeah. And then once annexation happens, then the Hawaiian Independence Day goes away because the U.S. isn't cool with it. Then Thanksgiving takes its regular place. Yeah.
But, there is now a kind of new conversation among Native peoples in Hawaii, and I think among historians who are trying to honor kind of that, to say like, no, this was a real moment of Hawaiian agency and Hawaiian rule, and so maybe this is really the Independence Day, and so it's kind of come back or been recontextualized in a really interesting way.
And a kind of cool way of making Thanksgiving in conversation with indigenous sovereignty, which isn't always the story that we tell.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of having them alongside one another to have these conversations and celebrations.
All right, before we go, as we often do at the end of the show, we'll do some also on this days. In 1782, the United States and Britain signed preliminary peace articles in Paris, ending the Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Paris is then signed in September of the following year.
And in 1803, Spain completed the process of ceding Louisiana to France, which had sold it to the United States.
Big day for imperial history.
Yeah. Seriously.
Just a year later, in 1804, the Senate began the impeachment trial for Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase, in case anybody needed some ideas.
Well, yeah. And did we do Samuel Chase impeachment?
I don't recall, but if we didn't,
the only Supreme Court justice to ever be impeached, right? Yes.
That's
so
a
I know
good
people
one.
So far, people have been bringing that one up for sure. 93, this is when President Bill Clinton signed the Brady Bill, which required a 5-day waiting period for handgun purchases and background checks of prospective buyers.
Supported by Ronald Reagan as well, by the way.
That's interesting. And in 1999, demonstrations against the World Trade Organization meeting by anti-globalization protesters in Seattle forced the cancellation of the opening ceremonies.
Supported, by the way, by Pat Buchanan, if you want more interesting bipartisan moments.
Well, we did an episode on that. I think those WTO...
the turtles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But those WTO protests were really, really interesting moment. And obviously, like you said, I mean, Pat Buchanan making nice with environmentalists. It's an interesting moment that you can pull on lots of those threads and still see them around today. All right. So that is our Also on This Day. As always, a reminder that we are going to be doing this in the newsletter as well, starting next year. Keep sending us your suggestions. And in the meantime, go ahead and subscribe to that newsletter if you want some more interesting political history as we go into the next year. That brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Support for This Day in Esoteric Political History comes from Odoo. What is Odoo? Well, Odoo is the only software your business will ever need. Featuring a suite of integrated business applications, Odoo connects your business operations together so you can get more done in less time. Odoo has apps for everything: CRM, accounting, sales, HR, inventory, marketing, manufacturing, you name it, Odoo's got it. To learn more, visit odoo.com/thisday. That's odoo.com/thisday.
Radiotopia.